Donald Trump has sent a letter to Canada threatening a new tariff rate of 35% starting August 1st.
Donald Trump says he'll impose 30% tariffs on imports from the EU and Mexico starting next month.
In just 48 trading hours, over $2 trillion in market value vanished as Wall Street's leading tech giants, often referred to as the Magnificent Seven, saw their stocks plunge dramatically. According to Reuters, the immediate catalyst appears to be a surprise move, a sweeping midnight announcement of new U.S. tariffs. These include a 35% surcharge on all Canadian imports and a potential 30% blanket tariff targeting goods from Mexico and the entire European Union, set to take effect on August 1st. The global response was swift. European leaders announced plans for reciprocal measures. In a bold signal, Ryanair hinted it may reconsider its $43 billion order for 330 Boeing aircraft, effectively challenging the U.S. administration to reconsider its stance. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico are already adapting, fast-tracking a $120 billion Northern Corridor rail and port initiative designed to bypass U.S. customs entirely. This new trade route could divert another $120 billion in high-value cargo, on top of the $144.8 billion already moving around U.S. ports each month. The result? Potentially major disruptions to U.S. manufacturing hubs, coastal shipping terminals, and aerospace industry payrolls. Stay with us because in the next few minutes, we'll examine this emerging corridor, break down the economic impact, and ask a critical question now echoing through Capitol Hill. Could a $120 billion steel rail project and a paused aircraft deal cause more disruption than a $2 trillion stock market drop? We begin by tracing the Northern Corridor, an ambitious $120 billion infrastructure plan linking Prince Rupert's Pacific megaport to a new terminal near Tampico on the Gulf of Mexico. Powered by the recently merged CPKC Railway and a next-gen blockchain custom system, this route clears freight in minutes and may be redefining North American trade as we know it. Strategists behind the Northern Corridor aren't mincing words. They say this new trade route could divert up to 50% of all Canada-Mexico freight that currently moves through U.S. highways and seaports. According to data from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, that cross-border traffic reached a historic $144.8 billion in March alone, the highest monthly figure ever recorded. Even a conservative estimate suggests that if half of this volume bypasses U.S. checkpoints entirely, Washington could see customs revenue losses exceeding $70 billion per month. That's more than the entire annual GDP of Alaska, gone before the holiday season. The geopolitical tensions are mounting fast. As reported by Reuters, on July 16th, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney held a high-level call. They agreed to accelerate a new bilateral trade agreement in direct response to the U.S. tariff schedule announced by President Trump, and hinted that a formal signing could take place before the end of the year. With every new stretch of rail being laid, this is no longer a theoretical plan. It's fast becoming reality. Insurance firms are adjusting their risk models. Financial analysts are downgrading revenue forecasts for major U.S. ports like Long Beach, and suppliers in Detroit are left wondering how to remain competitive as components start flowing tariff-free toward Veracruz. What was once a lobbyist diagram is now steel and concrete being installed across the continent, from Prince Rupert's Pacific Terminal to the industrial outskirts of Matamoros. Every track laid weakens America's tariff leverage. Because once those freight wheels begin to turn, economic pressure becomes tangible loss. Still think the Northern Corridor is just political theater? Let us know in the comments before the first train sends its message. Meanwhile, Washington is turning up the heat. On July 10th, President Trump signed an executive order imposing a flat 35% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States, effective August 1st. Just 2 days later, on Saturday, July 12th, he warned of a sweeping 30% tariff on all imports from Mexico if trade negotiations fall through. These dual deadlines strike at dawn on August 1st, giving two of America's top trading partners only a short window to respond. The legal language behind these measures leaves little room for ambiguity: clear, immediate, and enforceable. Steel slabs, rolled coils, engine blocks, and transmissions are now on the list for full tariff enforcement. In addition, sector-specific duties remain unchanged, 50% on raw metals and 25% on finished automobiles. Ottawa has condemned the move as economic blackmail, while Mexico City describes it as a troubling echo of colonial history. Financial markets appear cautiously optimistic that the White House may reconsider. But currency markets are sending a different message. Just hours after Canada's official response, the Canadian dollar slipped by 0.25%, its steepest single-day drop in a month, as investors began shedding exposure to Canadian exporters. By the following Monday, the Mexican peso had weakened by nearly 0.5%, reflecting growing concerns over rising import costs. While diplomatic rhetoric remains firm, the financial signals suggest that traders are already pricing in a prolonged standoff. These might seem like small shifts, but in a trillion-dollar foreign exchange market, they represent billions in lost purchasing power for manufacturers tied to U.S. supply chains. Each tick downward makes American machinery, semiconductors, and agricultural goods more expensive for buyers in Canada and Mexico, adding to the very inflation the U.S. administration claims it is trying to combat. Behind the scenes, supply chain managers are redrawing logistics maps. Avoiding a 35% tariff on a critical gearbox can mean the difference between maintaining operations and issuing layoffs. The longer this uncertainty continues, the more entrenched these alternate routes become. Banks from Toronto to Monterey are already drafting worst-case recession models, while trade lobbyists ramp up pressure on Capitol Hill with urgent appeals. Despite the growing strain, the U.S. administration remains firm. Officials argue that tariffs are the only language America's trading partners truly respond to, banking on a last-minute phone call or symbolic concession to reach a deal before goods hit customs checkpoints. But the clock is ticking. August 1st is a firm deadline, and factories in Windsor and Puebla aren't pausing for politics. If no compromise is reached, a single disrupted customs lane could trigger a chain reaction, pushing two interlinked economies closer to a full-scale downturn. That's the critical tipping point we'll explore in the rest of today's report, where a 35% tariff on cold steel meets a 30% surcharge on everything from avocados to car seats. Imagine the infrastructure already humming at full tilt. Ottawa has unleashed a massive $2.3 billion wave of investment through the National Trade Corridors Fund, and a significant portion is flowing directly into the Pacific Gateway Rail and Port Network, with Prince Rupert at its core. At the center of it all is the newly launched CPKC Spine, the first continuous rail line stretching from Canada's northwest coast to the Gulf of Mexico. This powerful route connects seamlessly with Kansas City Southern's historic southbound tracks, cutting 2 to 3 days off container transit times that would normally grind through Los Angeles bottlenecks. Logistics giant Schneider is already seeing the results. Shipments from Mexico to Chicago, once a sluggish 7-day journey, are now arriving in just 4. But speed is only part of the disruption. Canada's border infrastructure is undergoing a digital revolution. Paper forms are being replaced with code. A national single-window system and a blockchain-based pilot project have slashed export processing times for mid-sized shippers from 3 days to just 4 hours. When these improvements are stacked together, the impact on U.S. trade routes becomes staggering. A train that clears customs while still in motion and reaches the American Midwest 72 hours faster doesn't just bypass tariffs, it rewrites the rules of logistics. Delivery contracts, inventory strategies, factory shift schedules, and even insurance premiums are being recalibrated. Ocean carriers are already adjusting vessel routes. Ports south of Seattle are bracing for a drop in container volumes they may never recover. Back at Prince Rupert, cranes are gearing up for the surge. New rail extensions and a blockchain-ready container yard are set to process cargo the moment it arrives. Clearance is granted before the doors even open. Further south, CPKC is building a second Rio Grande rail bridge and preparing to double train frequencies as soon as Washington's new tariffs take effect. In short, the money is already spent, the tracks are laid, and the software is live. The only missing piece: the official tariff notice. Once that hits, the freight won't wait, it will move itself. Still think this is just posturing? Watch the next container bypass Detroit without stopping and judge for yourself. Washington's tariff strategy is poised to boomerang back toward American ports and payrolls. According to Fortune's early May figures, the U.S. Treasury had already collected $69 billion in customs duties for 2025, far ahead of expectations. But those revenues rely on steady volumes flowing through U.S. entry points. Shift even half of the Canada-Mexico trade stream to this northern corridor, and that revenue stream could dry up almost overnight. The fallout from these tariffs runs far deeper than just lost customs fees. Seaport cargo activity supports more than a quarter of the U.S. economy, a staggering $5.4 trillion annually, and keeps over 31 million Americans employed. From crane operators in Long Beach to warehouse teams outside Chicago, every shipping container that bypasses U.S. ports for alternatives like Prince Rupert quietly pulls a thread from the economic fabric that Washington's tariff policy claims to protect. A recent analysis from Yale's Budget Lab breaks it down in stark terms. Their mid-July briefing projects that the full 2025 tariff package, combined with retaliatory measures from abroad, could reduce long-term U.S. economic output by 0.5%. That's roughly $135 billion per year in today's dollars. The same report warns of 641,000 jobs lost, concentrated primarily in areas where manufacturing and agriculture intersect, the American Midwest. If that region loses access to vital trade routes, the ripple effects could destabilize the very sectors still recovering from the pandemic. Factory orders are already thinning, and the fragile housing rebound is starting to shake. Trucking brokers along I-94 are reporting softer rate quotes as shippers begin exploring rail alternatives that bypass Detroit entirely. Meanwhile, insurers monitoring Ohio's freight parks are seeing vacancy rates rise and are quietly adding surcharges to policy renewals. In simple terms, this tariff wall risks starving the very economy that funds it, and time is running out. If the first Northern Corridor freight block rolls through on August 1st, the U.S. Treasury's projected $69 billion in customs revenue for 2025 could quickly flip from surplus to shortfall. Ports from Seattle to Savannah may begin bleeding traffic, while campaign promises about reshoring American industry begin to ring hollow. So here's the question. Are key logistics hubs like Detroit, Buffalo, and Duluth bracing for impact or quietly preparing to pivot? Drop a comment and let us know what you're seeing before the tariff clock hits zero. But the disruption doesn't end at America's borders. Europe's carbon gate is swinging open, and Ottawa and Mexico City are first in line with green passes. Starting January 1st, 2026, the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism will fully activate. That means importers must pay for every ton of embedded CO2 in materials like steel and cement. With carbon credit prices now hovering between €63 and €75 per ton, a single steel slab with 1.9 tons of emissions per ton would face roughly €130 in extra charges. Canada's response: a low-emissions breakthrough. Ontario's X-Carb green steel clocks in at just 0.3 tons of CO2 per ton, positioning it as a top-tier, tariff-proof supplier for European buyers. The race for low-carbon exports is on, and those first to adapt will lead the next chapter in global trade. Run the numbers, and the picture becomes clear. Under the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, Canada's green steel can cross into Europe with just €20 in added carbon cost, an 80% discount before a single customs officer even lifts their stamp. Mexico is playing a similar game with lithium iron phosphate batteries. New plants in Celaya and Monterrey are racing to meet the EU's 55 kilograms CO2 per kilowatt-hour threshold, aiming to eliminate the tariff burden entirely. Now, add geography to the advantage. Prince Rupert, Canada's Pacific port powerhouse, sits 500 nautical miles closer to Asia than any other West Coast terminal. That means ships shave off up to 60 sailing hours, cutting both time and fuel costs. Skip U.S. paperwork, save 2 days at sea, and suddenly, the Northern Rail-to-Port corridor beats the traditional Asia, L.A. Midwest loop by double digits, even before factoring in EU carbon rebates. European buyers chasing cleaner, faster, and cheaper supply chains aren't waiting. Automakers in Bavaria are already dialing Canadian steel mills for low-emission sheet metal. Meanwhile, Spanish battery factories are requesting early shipments from Mexican partners. Every carbon-compliant container that exits through Prince Rupert is one fewer paying U.S. harbor fees and one more crack in Washington's tariff wall. So now the real question: is the CBM, the EU's carbon tax, just another layer of red tape, or is it a green express lane that turns America's $2 trillion trade wall into a self-inflicted wound? Tell us what you think, especially if you're quoting steel in Detroit or sourcing batteries in Buffalo. Because the Green Corridor countdown has just entered its final 18 months. Stop the tape. Canada and Europe may have just pulled the brakes on Trump's $2 trillion trade strategy, and Boeing's $43 billion mega deal is looking shaky. What started as a tariff war has triggered a global realignment. The Northern Corridor isn't just a freight route anymore. It's becoming a full-scale exit ramp from U.S. customs control. If Canada and Mexico shift enough steel, batteries, and components without ever touching U.S. soil, the global logistics map gets redrawn, and America risks being left on the sidelines. From where we sit, the next 18 to 24 months will determine everything. If these new routes reach even half of their capacity, Washington could face a stark choice: drop the tariffs, or watch as Detroit's orders shift to ports it can't regulate. What's your take? Will America adjust or get left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the next freight train in this $120 billion bypass may be carrying the future of U.S. trade, and it's not stopping for customs.